For your final exercise in this course, I'd like you to model a full low poly room. Please read the whole description down below this video to make sure you know what to submit because there are rules that we'll be grading these against. But in short, there have to be 30 to 50 objects in this room and they have to have good proportions. You can add materials and lights to the scene if you want, and you already know how, but honestly, I think you'd get much better practice out of this if you just focus on the modeling. Even submitting a screenshot or viewport render is perfectly fine. A lot of students like to jump to materials and lighting, and they skip over the modeling beyond the bare minimum because, let's be honest, modeling can be tedious, but it really shows and it won't help you learn modeling, so please avoid the temptation to do that here. In order to pass this exercise, you'll need at least 30 to 50 individual objects. If you need help coming up with that many, look at what's around you in your room or look at reference. Don't forget things like outlets, baseboards, and light switches. Your objects don't need to be all that complicated, but they do need to have good proportions. You could make your bedroom, your kitchen, your office, your living room, or a totally fictional room that you can get creative with. But even if it's a fictional room with fictional objects, I'd still recommend that you use reference for your objects because even if something doesn't exist in real life, you can base it off of something that does. And if you have a hard time coming up with enough objects to fill the space, then again, reference is your friend. Since we didn't talk about rendering at all in this course, I'll give you a couple rendering tips for getting this image out of Blender. First, if you want that isometric, old school game perspective look, what you can do is go to your camera and look through it by hitting 0 on your number pad. You can go to the camera properties and switch the type from perspective to orthographic. That'll get rid of all perspective distortion. That also means that you can't zoom in or out by moving your camera. For example, if I split my screen by right-clicking on one of the 3D view borders and choosing vertical split, just like so, if I look at this and just hit G and double tap Z to bring this out along the local Z axis, it's not changing the view at all. Instead, you'll need to change the orthographic scale. You can do this either in the camera properties or directly in the 3D viewport just by right-clicking when the camera is the active object and choosing camera lens scale, and moving your mouse left and right. To set up the scene, I'll use the cube as the walls and hit N to open up the sidebar and change the dimensions to 10 by 10 by 10 feet, FT for feet, or you can also work in meters if you'd like. But since I'm most familiar with feet and inches, what I'll also do is go to the scene properties, go down to units, and switch the system from metric to imperial, and then change the length from feet to adaptive so that I can work in both feet and inches depending on how big the object is. Now I'll also take the cube and hit G, Z, and 5 to bring it up 5 feet so that it's laying directly on the floor. Then for the camera, I'll select it and make sure that it's at exactly 45 degrees on the X and Z axes. Then if I bring it up along the Z axis and maybe zoom out a little bit, then we can view our cube at exactly that isometric angle. To make a square render, we need to go to our output properties, under format, and just change the resolution X to be the same as the resolution Y. I'll set both of those to be 1080 and zoom in again until the cube fills the entire frame. Of course, your room doesn't have to be exactly a cube. You can make it whatever shape you'd like. So go ahead and get creative with that. You can add a hallway or multiple floors or whatever you'd like. To actually see inside the room in our 3D viewport, I'll go over to my viewport display options for solid view and turn on backface culling. That way when I'm inside the cube, I can see outside, but I'd like to reverse this effect. So I'll hit Tab to enter edit mode, select everything, and then hit Alt-N to bring up my normals menu and choose flip. Now the normals are facing inside out, and no matter which angle I'm at, I can always see inside the cube. Of course, if I have 2 viewports, then I'll want to do it for both. Now, whenever you add objects to the inside, it's really easy to see them from all different angles. Now, to actually render this out, what you can do is go over to View and choose Viewport Render Image if you want to render out exactly what you see from your camera in the 3D view. So this is the easiest way to get the image out of Blender, and you can just go to Image and Save As, and save out the image here. If you want the colors to be exactly what you see in the 3D viewport, then you can switch the color management to Override and switch the view from AGX to Standard, but if you don't mind the colors being a little washed out, then you don't have to do that. Now, if you're going to render things out this way, then you might want to set up your viewport so that the objects have a little bit more separation to them. And for that, we can go to our viewport shading, make sure outline is on, and that way we can see the distinction between objects. But then you can also turn on cavity. Here, I'd set the type from screen to both and adjust the settings to your liking. Usually I'll do just a little bit of screen space, but then for the world space, I'll go into the settings and increase the distance such that it blends over the entire face of the largest wall. That keeps it a little more subtle and just looks a lot nicer. You can also switch to the brighter and flatter studio lighting, which can look quite good in this context. To give these objects color in the viewport, head over to the material properties, and when you're setting up your material, go down to Viewport Display and change the color here. That'll be the same color that shows up when you go to View and Viewport Render Image. If you don't want things like object origins showing up, then in your viewport you can also just go to your overlays and turn off object origins. But if you want to get really fancy and do want to use either Eevee or cycles for rendering, here are a few tips for that. First of all, take your object, and whenever you're done creating the shape of your room, select all of the faces that you can see from the camera, hit P, and choose Separate by Selection. One of these objects I'll just name Walls, and the other one I'll name Walls Front. Now, even though we can't see these from the camera in the viewport because of our back face culling, they do still show up in the render. We could turn these off by hiding them in the viewport and in the render by checking the eye and camera icons, but that presents us with a problem. If we add some windows here, I'll just take these three faces, eye to inset, eye again for individual, and then scale along the Z-axis here just to make some very crude windows. I'll hit delete and faces, and I'll place my light outside just like that. Maybe I'll make it a sun and set the strength to 10. And now we have some nice light coming in through the windows, but you'll notice a couple problems. First is that it's also coming in through the roof because we've told these other walls not to exist. So what we want to do is still use them in the render and in the viewport, but just see right through them. We still want our sunlight to interact with them, but we don't want our camera to see them. So for that, we can go to our Object tab, down to Visibility, which is the render visibility, and just turn off camera. Now in Eevee, you'll notice that we have these light leaks around the corners of the room, and you won't have that in Cycles. So if you want to just switch over to Cycles, then you'll get a much better render right out of the box, but it'll also take a little bit longer to render. So if you're working in Eevee, first of all, you might want to turn on ray tracing just to get some of that nice bounce lighting. But to get rid of those light leaks, what you need to do is add a little bit of thickness to the walls. So let's go to the modifiers, add modifier, and solidify. I added that to the front walls, not the back walls, so let's add that to the back walls instead. Solidify, and 1 inch. So that helped a little bit, but again, the shadows in Eevee are highly dependent on the light, so we can also select the light and just turn down the angle to decrease the softness, and that'll help get rid of that effect as well. Dealing with lights and shadows is a whole different course in and of itself, so watch the Fundamentals of Lighting course in this same series if you're curious about more of that. But for now, this should be enough to get you started on this exercise. Again, if you're rendering in solid view, then you can go to the View menu and Viewport Render Image. But if you're rendering in Eevee or Cycles, then you can go up to the Render menu and choose Render Image. Just be sure that if you do it this way, please add enough lights so that we can actually see your objects, because if it's too dark, then it's pretty hard to judge the modeling. But once you've done that, then go ahead and save this image out, and if you're watching this course on cgcookie.com, upload this to the exercise, and we'll be able to check it out and grade it. So that's the exercise, creating your own room, 30 to 50 objects, all with good proportions, and I know it'll take a good bit of time, but also at this point, I'm confident that you can do it. Also, don't forget that you can ask for help if you need it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you make, and good luck.